firing into itself.
No,
Unilateralist.
I don't think that. I don't think it isolates itself.
No,
I think
They can't afford to do that because the vacuum will now be filled by China and Russia.
Well, America, I mean, it's going to be a much more multilateral system now. That basically the radicalism of Bush failed in terms of that unilateral push. We're going to go away.
I just don't agree with that. I think Bush did what had to be done.
Yeah, but look at the result.
Well, the result's been fantastic in Iraq. They've won in Iraq,
No,
and I think Bush,
No,
in the long term,
you just said a minute ago that you said the insurgency will move back into Iraq and there'll be no one there to defend the ordinary Iraqis if they pull out. So this means the society, Iraqi society, is not sustainable on its own.
If Obama just says, "Oh, look, you know, I'm going to pull out of Iraq,"
well, I don't think he's saying it. He's saying a gradual withdrawal.
I think the real question is whether, I mean, the price of getting Americans out of Iraq and getting American public opinion to accept it was to say, we're going to go to Afghanistan. That's actually even more irrational
I agree.
consequence. So the question is how they're going to do that.
I don't think that's an alternative.
But I think the key thing to remember is the United States is broke. It was broke before the financial crisis. It had Bush
$1 trillion deficit.
Yeah, enormous deficit, trade deficit, in hock to China, and now particularly because of the global financial crisis, you have this concatenation of American recession, Chinese immediate falling production, and that's where we're
but it's worse than that because we've got the overlay.
The political consequences in China,
global warming
going
overlay.
on.
You see, who's going to? America will not be able to afford the global warming.
Yeah, but that's going to be some time down the track in terms of when that really cuts in. Whereas in China runs on two things at the moment. Forget about the revolution. It runs on economic performance and legitimacy. You know, we're doing well, so your rice bowl's getting better. It runs on nationalism. Well, if the rice bowl starts getting smaller, then you're left with nationalism to legitimate a communist dictatorship. And you've got a communist party dictatorship.
So you've got a more overtly aggressive foreign policy.
You start to worry about that sort of thing. And I think in East Asia, Japan is remarkably like Australia. I mean, all the obvious differences apart. You know, we're both very anxious allies of the United States. They're very big ones, but they get extraordinarily nervous. And they actually have reason to be nervous for two reasons. One is, rather like John Howard, they followed the Bush line, a very, very hard line against China, ramping up militarisation.
Koizumi was extraordinary.
Koizumi, and that was followed by Abe. The second thing is that in the negotiations with North Korea, the six-party talks, they have really gone out on a limb over the abduction issues, leaving themselves some distance from the Americans. And even before Obama, the guess was that sooner or later, the Americans and the North Koreans would find some way of making up. And Japan will be left probably paying for it all.
Clinton did a deal.
So the Japanese are kind of anxious about those kind of issues. And in the question of China, climate change is a very serious issue there.
Well, but there is no prospect of climate change remedies being brought in China. China just won't do it.
China is leading the charge. I don't have much time for the Chinese Communist Party, but one of the things which is interesting, when they decide to do something, they do it fairly
Wind energy production in China is phenomenal.
Exactly.
Phenomenal.
I mean, they see this as an
That's the
export
growth
industry.
market.
That's one part of it. I was talking to somebody who knows the North Koreans very well, somebody resident in Beijing who deals with them all the time, and she said, Richard, North Korea is a great place to do environmental experiments. And I naively said, oh yes? And she said, because people do what they're told. Now, that's a bit of a bad joke, given it, but there is something to it. But clearly, the other thing with the United States and China is, before 9/11, the big question facing the Republicans is China a strategic competitor or strategic partner? Under Clinton, it was partner. Until 9/11 under Bush, it was very clear the answer was competitor.
What you're really saying, what you're really saying, because I think we do have to go to a break shortly, but I think what you're really saying is we're going to get a return to the sort of multilateralism that where we used to under
United
Nations. Under Bush 1, under Clinton. And a move away from the sort of radical unilateralism.
A move away from the radicalism, but in a much less stable environment. The United States has fewer diplomatic resources, political resources, financial resources, and definitely fewer military resources. And the financial crisis is this concatenating run. And that's probably what matters most to Australia, both directly and in terms of diplomacy in China.
Well, look, thank you. We have to wind up this segment. Thank you very much for coming in once again. It's a great topic and we could talk all night, but thanks once again and we'll be back in a moment.